In looking back at Niall's life, as we've been doing constantly since he died, one glaring fact emerges. He never made an enemy out of anyone. One of his friends wrote in the letter that they feel sad for people who never got the chance to meet or know him. The ultimate result of Niall's horrific injuries was that he died a lonely death in the streets of a town he loved so much. To say we all loved him is an understatement. Simply put, it was a class act.
In October 2010, I was a uniform inspector in the Drogheda Division, and my work consisted of representing court cases in the district court. I was on my way back to the station. I got a phone call from my chief superintendent, and he informed me, "You're now the new detective inspector in the division." Would I make my way to Dundalk station? It's a border town, and any border town brings its own problems. And I'd never set foot in Dundalk Garda Station. But it was called Fort Apache, and it wasn't called Fort Apache for nothing. Outside of Dublin, it was one of the most busiest stations in the country. Louth Division, for being such a small county, had one of the highest crime rates at one stage. Everything that was on the menu for a policeman to deal with was found here in Dundalk.
Pat Mary's first case as a detective inspector in An Garda Síochána was already waiting for him.
A young chap who had been assaulted the night before had passed away in hospital. I was asked to take up the investigation. Your first day as a detective inspector, you don't even get time to draw your breath, and you have a murder on your desk. I had a degree of experience, but nothing prepares you for, here it is, here's your first case, there you are, get on with it. The chap was named Niall Dorr, and he had been involved in a row the night before, around 9 o'clock.
Garda forensic experts beginning their work examining the scene this morning where the man was viciously assaulted. The victim sustained serious injuries, including some to his head. He was rushed to Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Drogheda. His condition there remains critical.
The Gardaí were flagged down by a motorist to say there was a row in progress. They made their way to the scene and they found Niall. He was half lying under a parked car. He was naked from the waist up. And an ambulance was on scene very, very quick. When they got to the hospital, he had deteriorated, and that word came back to the Gardaí that this man is not well, and the Gardaí at that stage preserved the scene.
My name is Dave Dorr. I'm Niall Dorr's dad. Niall was lucky enough, in his words, to be born here in Dundalk in November 91, which would have made him 18 when he died in 2010. The one thing about Niall, and the refreshing thing about him, he was always in great form, you know, and that's the kind of thing you miss. If I was 17 or 18, at around the time Niall was that age, I'd have loved to have been his friend. That was the kind of guy I'd have been friends with myself, which I think says a lot for the chap, you know. I think when his dad can turn around and say, "I'd like to have been your mate," I think it says a lot about him.
What are you laughing at now?
The Dorr family was made up of Niall, his older brother Shane, and parents Veronica and Dave.
Today is the 8th of November, and it's Niall's birthday party. And what age are you? No.
The four of us were very, very tight. We had great holidays in Disney World.
Now, if this saw me now, I could be dead.
We went skiing. We had never skied before, none of us. And we're in a group of complete learners. We got to this particular part. To me, it looked crazy stuff. And I'm saying, well, I'm definitely taking the walk. I'm not going over that. And next time we heard this thing to our right-hand side. And here was Niall, on his own. The man hadn't even given the instruction. He's on his skis and he's gone. And he goes over the edge of it. And he goes down, and he comes up, and I'm thinking, he jumps up on the two skis, and everyone is clapping him, and he turns around, and he's two hands in the air. Now, if you want to ask me about one abiding memory I have in Niall Dore, that's it.
A step up from D Sergeant to the I is immense. The responsibility you have is a lot more, and you feel it. And I was very conscious about conducting the investigation properly. You, as a senior investigating officer, manage and control the investigation. You make the decisions in respect to the investigation. I was nervous. I won't say anything else. I was nervous. We're here on Castle Road, which is about, I suppose, 10-minute walk from the centre of Dundalk, from the square. It's a sought-after area. It's not an area where it's known for any major trouble.
Niall Dore was found by police on Castle Road. He was lying unconscious against a parked car.
I came to see if the scene was being preserved properly. What I did then was just stand back, take a deep breath, look around my surroundings, see what's at hand in respect of the scene, and just sense what has happened here. There was a number of cars parked on the road, and I was aware that some of the people involved had ran down the road in the course of this route. Maybe the culprits put their hands on car bonnets when they were running, and they have to be looked at. Investigations can be very, very challenging, very complex, and you only ever get one chance of seizing evidence or seizing material in respect of an investigation. So you don't make a mess of it by leaving stuff behind. I had something to prove. I had to prove that I was capable, competent, and able to run a murder investigation that would result in the suspect in this crime being brought before the courts.
On the evening he was attacked, Niall was out for drinks with friends.
I met Niall one bonfire night, and we met through mutual friends and bonded that day. From then, we were pretty inseparable. My name's Tiernan O'Donnell. I'm a family friend of the Dore family. I had been at home and I'd received a call from a mutual friend to say that the guys that Niall was with had been in an altercation, that Niall was caught up in it, and that Niall had been taken away in an ambulance. As soon as I heard, I thought, this can't be right. It's not in Niall's nature to be in a fight. He's the peacekeeper and everything. He's not the type of person that somebody would want to get into a row. Then came to find that this was true, so I thought I'd reach straight out to his parents, and I called Dave. I let him know that what had happened, that he'd been taken away in an ambulance.
Got into the hospital about 11:30. And a doctor comes out to me. And I says to the doctor, I says, is he all right? And the doctor looks at me, he's fine. We just need to do a couple of tests on him, but for all the world, he's perfect. He's grand, he's okay. And I don't know, half an hour, 20 minutes, or some time later anyway, two Dundalk Gardaí walked in. And I says, lads, I says, what is ye here? We heard it was an assault. I said, it's not that bad, is it? The doc says he's all right. The door opens. Doctor walks in, and the nurse comes in. As soon as she sat down, I knew it was all over. So the doc comes over and sits beside me here, and I says to him, listen, I says, answer me this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being good, 10 being bad, where's Niall? He's 9. He's 9. And our world collapsed right there and then. That was it. Bang.
Later then, that day, David called me. He'd said that with the condition deteriorating, that it might be best to try and get up to the hospital, try and say my last goodbyes. So I'd agreed. I said, yeah, we'll go up to the hospital. I'll see how things had progressed, still thinking positively about it. Shortly afterwards, then David called me and he said that that his condition had deteriorated more and that we wouldn't have time to actually get up to say goodbye. Sorry.
One of the main responsibilities of a senior investigating officer is to attend the post-mortem. The state pathologist, and in this particular case Mary Cassidy, will be able to tell you and show you how someone died. Niall Dore, over his left ear, he had a 70mm crack in his skull. He also had the chevron markings of a boot and the full shape of a boot across his top of his head and across his face. Mary Cassidy had to examine his brain, and it was commented that it was one of the worst brain injuries that she had seen from this type of an assault. It just brought home to me the degree of savagery that was inflicted on this poor young man who had his life in front of him.
Pat now began his search for evidence of who was responsible.
One of the things you look for is their CCTV that will catch the incident, so it'll all make it very easy for you to see who the culprit is.
But straight away, there was a problem.
There was not a screed of CCTV on Castle Street, so I had to rely on witnesses. We had a couple who were out walking a dog. We had someone who passed in a car. We had a gentleman looking out his bedroom window and shouting at them to stop and get away.
In the first breakthrough of the investigation, those witnesses all agreed on one important fact.
They said that there was only one person involved in the assault on Niall Dore. We have a witness who saw Niall being hit with a punch by this man and fall to the ground. He then encountered a relentless, unforgiving assault where this person stood on his head, kicked him in the head, and then dragged him by the T-shirt over to the footpath, where he continued to lift his head up and smash it off the ground. He then got his head and smashed it into the wheel nuts of a car and then continued to jump on him and kick him. It was an absolute and honest-to-God, utter savage assault. It's the only way to describe it, is savage. It was at that stage that one of the witnesses was shouting out the window to get away, to stop. And that's when the assault on Niall Dore stopped. We were able to establish that Niall and his two friends were confronted by approximately 7 people, 5 males and 2 females.
Niall's friends were chased from the scene before the attack and did not witness who was responsible. So, Pat arrested the entire gang of 7. But all kept silent on the identity of Niall's killer.
There were people who didn't cooperate that could have cooperated. There was a big choke on investigations when you looked for information, when you looked for, help. The scale of the challenge was huge because we had to establish which of them inflicted the wounds on Niall Dore. Were these people going to cooperate? More than likely they weren't. Was it one person? Was it 2 people? Was it all 5 males? I didn't know.
This wall of silence threatened to obstruct the entire investigation, but it left Pat more committed than ever to finding answers.
I was determined to get to the end of it, to find out who did this and why they did it, and that they would be brought to justice.
Flowers left by family and friends in memory of Niall Dore lie close to where he was attacked. Gardaí are still conducting detailed searches of the Castle Road area in their hunt for evidence. They've also been conducting door-to-door inquiries in the area, as well as talking to witnesses.
But key witnesses were refusing to reveal information. It left newly promoted Detective Inspector Pat Murray with few leads.
All investigations, when they start off, they are a challenge. There is no doubt, and the senior investigating officer feels that. Meeting David Dore and Veronica Dore for the first time in the superintendent's office in Dundalk. I remember looking at David Dore and he was looking at me. I know he was taking stock of me as probably thinking, is this guy up to the job?
As the distressing detail of the attack on Niall Dore became known, locals were stunned.
The people of Dundalk were just absolutely horrified and shocked at what had happened to this young man. My name is Michelle O'Keefe and I'm the editor of the Dundalk Democrat, one of the leading local papers in the area. Beyond the shock and horror, there was fear, because something like this doesn't happen to your son or your daughter. And I suppose parents were fearful for their young people as they went out and didn't want them to go out after Niall's death.
I felt like you were in a movie at times, a horror movie. You'd got detectives calling me up, wanting interviews.
I'm sorry for the child's mother and father and family. It's heartbreaking.
Have a rush of feelings, anger, sadness, revenge, all these feelings that you never think that you're going to have over a situation like this. But it's very hard to describe.
Tiernan and the rest of Niall's friends made their final goodbye at his wake and a funeral.
Niall's life was his soul, his happiness, his smile. People say that they look like they're sleeping. Niall wasn't sleeping. It didn't look anything like him.
Pat now believed he was looking for one main culprit in the Gang of Seven. He questioned each of them, but none would name the attacker.
I had to identify who was this person. It certainly wasn't the girls, so it was one of the 5 males. And which one was it?
Statements from eyewitnesses on Castle Road offered a clue.
They all said the man who done all the kicking and stamping on this young chap's head was the only one of them that was wearing a shirt.
Pat turned again to the limited information available in the statements from each of the gang members.
Now, we did establish that they were due in court that morning and the case was adjourned and put back, and as a result of that they were celebrating and they went drinking at 11 o'clock in the morning.
CCTV clearly showed each of the gang drinking in pubs around Dundalk that day. One man stood out.
One particular person was wearing a shirt, and he was the only one of the 5 wearing a shirt. This man's name is Douglas Ward.
It was now immediately clear to Pat why the other members of the gang kept silent.
We were all aware who Douglas Ward was. He was known to the Gardaí. Dundalk, it's a robust town. It has plenty of good people, but it does have an element that causes trouble. Douglas Ward would have been public order offences, maybe drug offences, that type of thing. He would have been known as a hard man. People would have feared Douglas Ward. So he was, at that stage, a suspect. Douglas Ward was initially arrested on suspicion of assault on Niall Dore. I knew what I was dealing with Douglas Ward. People like Douglas Ward, they're in every town in Ireland, and people don't want to challenge them. And then they get superior in their nature, because if you don't do what I say, I'll knock the head of you. That type of mentality. And that's just the way it is. And people are afraid of them. End of story.
Pat asked Ward to surrender the clothes he was wearing on the night of Niall's attack.
The items of interest we have here are a set of clothes that Douglas Ward produced to us.
Pat was hoping the clothes would link Ward to the crime. But this outfit bore no resemblance to the one Ward could be seen wearing on CCTV.
Douglas Ward handed us these clothes with the view of trying to put us off the track. And it's as simple as that. It was him trying to cover himself. And that's where criminals carry on. They don't always cooperate with the guards. And when they do, like this, they have an ulterior motive. Well, I've given them clothes. They're not going to find anything on that.
Pat returned again to CCTV and found footage of Douglas Ward leaving a bar wearing a shirt, but also carrying a grey hoodie.
An item like this became evidential because we knew the person that assaulted Niall Dore was wearing a grey hoodie. So we had to search for that grey hoodie. And we did at Douglas Ward's house. It was circumstantial, of course, and not a major piece of evidence, but it was a building block that could be put in the mix at the end of the day. They always believe that you won't do it, that you can't get enough. But they're dealing with the wrong person with me anyway, because I will go and get it. I will find it. I will get them before the court.
My name's Christopher Smith. I actually went to primary school and secondary school with Niall. It was a very big group. There might have been about 10, 15 of us. We were always together every single day. Once he was with his mates, he was just happy. Like every single day, like you'd always get a text from him or a message from him. So.
His main talent was kickboxing, so he was fantastic at that national and international level.
How do you feel? Him, how do you feel?
Feel very good.
I do.
Yeah, it feels good. Feels good. Boy feels good.
How do you feel?
Oh, I'm brilliant.
You're brilliant. How about you? Well, you're a kickboxer, you're always brilliant.
The year before he died, he'd won a silver medal at the World Championships, due to go to another tournament the month after he died. He spent most of his time kind of training to it, discipline from it, which showed in his personality.
Niall was not the type of guy who would plan too far into the future now. Niall's idea of living was today is today, tomorrow we'll see what happens. Niall was as close to adamant as you can get. I'll go to school, I'll do the school, I'll get my exams, but I'm not doing third level.
Started off down here, because they marked this, I think, in 1.5 miles. And that's what the fitness test for the army was. You did it 1.5 miles in 11 minutes.
How do you do it now?
I think I'd be here till tomorrow. We both decided that we wanted to go to the army. There was enlisting upcoming, so we both put our minds to it, both got together, started training for the army.
Niall and Tiernan both passed the fitness test. Everything now depended on a personal interview.
Niall's interview for the army was scheduled for 8 a.m. on Wednesday, the 13th of October.
I met up with him shortly afterwards. He let me know kind of how he got on in the interview, how things had progressed, celebrated.
He thought, yeah, I hit it all on the money. I don't think I made a mistake.
I had my interview shortly afterwards, a couple of days later, I think. So I decided not to stay out with him that evening. I wanted to go home and do a bit more study, pick up on some of the questions that he found out of that day, and then got the call a few hours later that he'd been in an altercation, and that he'd be taken away in an ambulance.
Niall's friends told police how the altercation was sparked by a row from a few nights earlier.
There had been an incident at the fairground a few nights previous involving friends of Douglas Ward and Niall Dorr. Neither of them had actually been at the fairground or involved in the incident, but as Douglas Ward and his group that he was with came down Castle Road, they saw Niall and his two friends who were returning home. There was words said, and it was Niall that jumped in to try and keep the peace and diffuse the situation. But unfortunately, before he even knew what was happening, Douglas Ward had punched him to the ground.
Anyone that knew Niall knew he was just quiet, just wanted to keep to himself, just be with his friends. And like, I've never seen him in a fight, and I know him like almost my whole life. So it was like a big shock, I think, just for everybody. Like, you don't know how to feel. Like, we were in his house and we all got a wee jersey, signed it and stuff like that for the parents, but you just feel hopeless and useless because what can you do? Like, your friends, they're just there and, like, you can't do anything to help them. So
Pat had statements from passers-by and CCTV evidence that appeared to connect Douglas Ward to the crime, but this evidence was only circumstantial.
There was no doubt in my mind, as I said, that Douglas Ward was the perpetrator of the assault on Niall Dorr. How can I prove it? Douglas Ward is saying, I wasn't there. I don't know what you're on about. So I had to establish that he was there and that he did commit the assault. We're here on Castle Street in Dundalk, and Chapter House are these apartments here. And it was here that Douglas Ward said he called to go to a party. The occupant of the apartment said there's going to be no party, and he asked Douglas Ward to take himself off.
Police interviewed the householder.
He made a statement saying they had left his apartment block, walked out the gates and turned left. All of them did, including Douglas Ward.
There were no CCTV cameras on Castle Road, but Pat did discover some in areas nearby.
Douglas Ward said he came out of the apartment and turned right up this street here. And we, as part of the investigation, had gathered all the CCTV in the adjoining roads. And if Douglas Ward had turned right, we would have caught him on CCTV. We didn't catch him on CCTV. It told us that Douglas Ward was lying. Douglas Ward turned left and walked down to Castle Road, and it was there that he encountered and ran into Niall Dore.
Yet, even with eyewitness statements, it was not proof Douglas Ward was definitely present at the attack. Pat needed another way.
None of the witnesses could tell us how those people left the scene, but we did establish that one of the girls had a car and that they got into the car and left.
The witness drove Ward to a local hotel. His nose was bleeding and he used baby wipe tissues to clean it, then threw them out the car window.
We had the Crown Plaza Hotel searched and we found bloodied tissues. The tissues were intact. The weather hadn't in any way affected them. And the forensic lab were quite happy they would be able to extract DNA from the blood tissues, which they did, and they matched it with Douglas Ward's DNA. Finding these bloodied wipes was another building block in building our case.
Pat still needed a way to identify Ward as the attacker. He turned to witnesses among passers-by.
We had one witness who said that he could identify the person who committed the assault on Niall Dore.
Pat now planned an identity parade, but one carried out covertly on the streets of Dundalk.
There used to be a post office here, but it's now gone. And we knew Douglas Ward was collecting his unemployment benefit there on a certain day. And across the road, we had a camera set up above in the Windsor public house. We had our witness in a car here. He was instructed to put his hand up if he saw the person that assaulted Niall Dore. Douglas Ward arrived, went into the post office. And left. And our witness failed to pick him out.
All Pat could do was try again.
We held a second informal identification parade. Douglas Ward did appear, and he was in the company of his brother, and they looked quite similar. So when the two of them walked past the witness, he was confused, and he told us, I couldn't pick anyone out, and that was it. Two informal identification parades had not resulted in any evidential value, so you have to leave it at that. But certainly it would have been a major boost, evidentially, to have Douglas Ward identified at that stage. But you can't win them all, and that's just it.
Frustrated by the silence from members of Ward's gang and the failure of his ID parades, Pat had to find another approach.
People think assaults or one person assaulted the other, it's easy to get them. This was anything but simple. And I knew that forensics is going to be key in solving this crime and bringing it together.
My name is Stephen Clifford. I'm a forensic scientist at Forensic Science Ireland. My main area of expertise is DNA profiling. There had been a kind of a melee where there was many people involved, so these kind of cases can be difficult to detangle. So usually the first pass is to see what kind of DNA profiles we can get from certain items, which might help address some of the questions.
So in this case, one of the exhibits that came into the lab was a cigarette. Cigarettes, and cigarette butts in particular, because they come into contact with, they're usually in somebody's mouth, the person's mouth, and a person's mouth is full of saliva. Saliva is a really good source of DNA. The cigarette looked unsmoked. Without knowing, there was a small possibility that it was in somebody's mouth, they just didn't smoke it. So we still targeted the butt, and we took some of the paper from the filter of the cigarette off, and then we subjected that to the normal DNA profiling procedures. The filter paper from the butt of the cigarette was analysed. We found that there was a DNA profile that originated from 2 people. And when that DNA profile was compared to persons of interest in the case, there was a match from one of the 2 people in the cigarette butt to the profile of Douglas Ward, plus a second unknown person.
Pat hoped for forensic evidence to place Douglas Ward at the scene of the crime, but once again, it was inconclusive.
The DNA on the cigarette was unquestionably Douglas Ward's, but the object itself was movable, and there was an unknown DNA on it as well. So Douglas Ward could have given that cigarette to someone else the day before who dropped it in the course of a row. We don't know. So it was a movable object. It wasn't of any evidential value to me, and I couldn't use it as reasonable evidence.
Despite everything, Pat still could not build a solid case. It was increasingly possible Douglas Ward could escape justice.
Do you run a trial and run the risk of Douglas Ward being found not guilty, that there's a reasonable doubt someone else committed the crime?
Niall's life and the way he was killed comes to this.
Pat Marry was certain Dundalk hardman Douglas Ward killed 18-year-old Niall Dorr. But Ward's gang members refused to identify him, forcing Pat to search instead for forensic evidence. Niall's t-shirt was found near his body. Now Pat hoped it might carry the killer's DNA.
This is the t-shirt that was picked up by the ambulance crew that attended to Niall and brought it to Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in the ambulance.
We had a witness statement where the person said that they saw Niall Dorr being dragged by his shoulders. So in this case, I concentrated on the upper back and shoulders of his t-shirt. And we looked for any signs of damage, would be the first visual thing. Secondly, then we look for any sign of staining. So the staining will help us to determine whether there are any body fluids present. So we're always looking for something that we can DNA profile. There was a mixed DNA profile present, and the profile matched Niall Dorr himself, which you might expect, but it also contained elements of Douglas Ward's DNA.
After 3 long months, it seemed like a step forward at last.
I remember informing my team of the DNA development. They were all very excited, saying, yes, we have it solved, we have it solved.
But Pat was not convinced.
He may say then, oh, well, right, I'm going to admit I was there all along, but I didn't touch that fella, but I was spitting at him to get away from me. And the DNA on the t-shirt was his spittle. I went to the forensic lab again and I spoke to them and explained to them my predicament. So they said they could do tests, and it was the first time they did this, that they could do a test to show that it wasn't saliva.
The forensic team set to work. Meanwhile, Pat was still worried about hitting another dead end and turned to the public for help.
When I first approached Niall's parents, David and Veronica, I made it clear that I was a local journalist who was living in the area, who had seen firsthand how the killing of their son had touched the community. They were obviously eager to get an appeal into the national press to try and find justice for what had happened to their son.
Pat himself appeared on the RTE programme Crime Call, appealing to the public for any information that might help.
What's the main thrust of your appeal here tonight?
At this stage, Anna, I have reason to believe, and do believe, there are people who witnessed the incident and they are refusing to cooperate with the investigation. And I'll be asking those people to examine their conscience, that if they're unsure, they should come and speak with us in confidence, and I'd ask them to do the right thing.
We got an anonymous letter. The anonymous letter stated that a number of people had witnessed the assault and knew the perpetrator. They were in a small red car, and they gave us the name of the people that were in this car.
Pat was certain the letter writer was in a position to name Ward, but once again, they refused to make an official statement for fear of reprisals.
You're appealing to that person's good nature to tell the truth. And she's going to be looking at, well, what's in it for me? If I tell you the truth, I'm going to have my windows broken. I'm going to have my car smashed up. I saw nothing. And that's intimidation. She was afraid to say what she saw because she knew there would be consequences. That's the culture of fear that exists in border towns like Dundalk.
The crux of this investigation is that I had eyewitnesses who would not cooperate. I had an eyewitness who thought they could pick out the culprit but couldn't. And what was I left with in the end of the day but DNA and CCTV?
Pat's case now rested on the team at Forensic Science Ireland. They were using a new test to prove the DNA on Niall's t-shirt could not have come from Douglas Ward's saliva.
What we do in this case is we're looking for any skin cells that might have been removed from the assailant's hand as he grabbed with force onto the t-shirt in this way. And how we collect those is we use a little piece of sticky tape called a mini tape. And what we do is we just touch that to the surface of the garment, and it'll collect any loose epithelial or skin cells that happen to be there. So everyone deposits skin cells naturally. Some people are better shedders than others. If you sweat, you're more likely to shed more epithelial cells. If there's a lot of friction involved, you're going to shed more cells. We could rule out that it had come from blood because there was no blood staining present in the area. We could rule out that it had come from saliva because we tested for the presence of saliva and we got negative results there. So really it was a process of elimination, and I was able to say that the most likely source of the DNA was from epithelial or skin cells.
The fact that the DNA of Douglas Ward on the t-shirt was found in an area of the t-shirt which was synonymous with someone dragging him by the t-shirt across the road. And that was extremely important to establish, which we did. And that became very evidential.
Douglas Ward had been arrested and released once already, but this new evidence gave Pat another opportunity.
When Douglas Ward was arrested for the second time, it was to put to him about the DNA evidence. He actually said, I haven't a clue how it got there. I don't know how my DNA got on the dead man's t-shirt. He couldn't even say Niall's name when he was detained. Most of his answers were no comment. So it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, his answer. But I didn't care at that stage because I knew I had him in the bag.
The investigation was at last closing in on Ward, but Pat had to have an answer to every possible defence.
I had to do a due diligence on the t-shirt itself. Could Douglas Ward's DNA be left on that t-shirt at any other incidents?
Pat had to consider every possibility, however unlikely.
Veronica, Niall's mother, had bought that t-shirt 3 weeks earlier, and she bought it in the Butter Crane shopping centre, and she said on the 12th she had washed it and ironed it and given it to Niall to put on.
Could Ward have handled the t-shirt in the shop, leaving his DNA on it, before Niall's mum had even bought it?
When Douglas Ward was arrested, he was questioned about his shopping habits, and had he ever been in Butter Crane shopping centre in Newry, and he said he had never been there in his life and he never done any shopping up there.
With this single statement, Douglas Ward at last incriminated himself in Niall's death.
I knew that Douglas Ward had held Niall Dore's t-shirt at a time of the assault, and he could not have had his DNA on that t-shirt at any other time. I was quite confident I had a strong case against Douglas Ward. for the murder of Niall Dore.
I'd heard rumours that they arrested someone. Then he was released. Then there was another guy and another thing. And it just went on and went on and went on. Then they finally came to the conclusion, we're going to charge this guy with murder. And I says, right, now we're on the horse now. Thank you. So we took it from there.
As the trial date approached, Pat reviewed every detail of his case.
The defence team will pick up on any weaknesses, so you have to make sure your file is watertight and your investigation is watertight. And I always made sure mine was watertight. Absolutely.
But an unexpected turn of events suddenly gave Douglas Ward a plausible defence.
One of the persons in Douglas Ward's company that night at the time of the assault had died tragically in a road traffic accident. It was an opening for the defence to say that Douglas Ward didn't do this. The person who is now deceased did it.
It would be enough to establish reasonable doubt in the minds of a jury. And it forced the Director of Public Prosecutions, or DPP, to consider a guilty plea from Ward, not for murder, but for the lesser charge of manslaughter.
Do you run a trial and run the risk of Douglas Ward being found not guilty, that there's a reasonable doubt someone else committed the crime? Or do you take a manslaughter charge which carries 0 to life? And I agreed with them.
The DPP was prepared to accept a guilty plea to manslaughter, but Niall's family had to be convinced.
Dave's first time in a meeting like this wanted to hear one thing and one thing only: we're going for murder. So this is what I was told, due to a number of factors, one being that there was no video evidence, that the best we could hope for, and he might get a murder and he might get off, but he's pleading to manslaughter. Niall's life, the way he was killed, comes to this. He did this to a human being and denied being there. And then he ends up admitting to manslaughter.
In fairness to David Dornat, he left it to the experts, which was the DPP, to decide on, and the prosecuting counsel.
A conviction for manslaughter allows a judge to impose a wide range of sentences. Niall's family wanted justice, but Douglas Ward hoped for leniency.
I think myself he was under the impression he was going to get a sentence of about 5 or 6 years. You know, good behaviour and all, he'd do 2 years and he'd be out.
Ward didn't know Niall Dore, but the court heard he ripped the teenager's shirt off him and continued to attack him, even when he was unresponsive on the ground. The senior investigating officer, Detective Inspector Patrick Marry, said Niall sustained irrevocable brain damage. Surgery was not possible.
The judge at the time, who I remember now deceased, he says, you're getting 16 years, and if I could give you more, I would. So I says, that's. They weren't expecting that at all. And the guards probably weren't expecting it.
Niall was the peacemaker and didn't want harm to come to anyone. But little did he know that he was dealing with bloodthirsty thugs. To knock a person unconscious and then to repeatedly bang his head off the ground and kick his lifeless body to a pulp is just the stuff of animals.
There's a bit of relief, knowing that nobody was going to get away with it. We know that these cases can be difficult, can be hard to prove. There's a bit of comfort knowing that he was going to spend a long time behind bars.
Douglas Ward got a sentence of 16 years with 3 years suspended. When I was leaving the court, Veronica Dore came up to me and she says, Pat, only for you, thank you. And she gave me a big hug. I knew at that stage I had done a good job. I'd done good by the family. That to me was a moment I won't forget.
But Niall's killer had one more card to play.
Douglas Ward appealed his conviction on the basis that he was drunk at the time and he had a drink problem. And being an alcoholic or having a drink problem is seen as having a disease. The appeal court knocked 3 years off his sentence on that basis.
The chaplain in Mountjoy prison wrote a letter on behalf of the guy who killed my son to say that this guy was a model prisoner who hadn't had a drink since he went to Mountjoy.
I believe that you take a life, you should spend the rest of your life behind bars. To say there's excuses behind it, there are reasons that you do things like that. You can blame certain issues, but that was pure evil. Whether whether he spent 25 years, 16 years, or the rest of his life in jail. I don't think that you can justify murder. There's no justice behind it.
And this is where we would have set the vigil.
Hundreds of candles.
There's hundreds of people up here for weeks.
Talking about it's harder, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a street. It's a street to try to avoid as much as possible. So many dark memories.
We'll never forget him. He'll always be with us, like. And even on our nights out, like, we still mention Niall, we talk about Niall. We'll have a drink for Niall. So he'll always be with us, like.
He'll never be able to have a son, a daughter, hold his child, feel that love, that connection. He'll never be able to walk down an aisle with the woman that he loves. He'll never be able to see his new nephew that he has now. All these things that he's missed out in life were stolen from him. I could have went down a dark road after it, but I owed more to Niall and his family. I promised him that I'll do the things that were robbed of him.
The last time I saw him, he was in the hospital in Drogheda, and at about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or sometime on that Thursday, they decided, look, we're going to be taking him out now and we're going to take him downstairs for his organs operation. So they're going to take him. So it's grand. I can still remember, just before he went around the corner, phew, that was hard. I can't get over my head. But what a great guy. You know, he was 18 and he decides, I'm going to have an organ donor card. It wasn't just a snap decision, give me that and I'll sign it. I still actually have his card in my wallet, his organ donor card. But he decided he wanted it. And he took his time over signing, he took a day or two, and then he gave it to his mum, hold that for me. Of course. His mother looks, yeah, grand, I'll keep it for you.
Niall was actually the reason I became an organ donor. The nights of his wake and stuff, we had organ donor cards out. Still do it at his anniversaries and stuff like that. Try and promote that as much as possible because that's something that gives me great comfort knowing that he was able to save 5 lives with the organs that he donated.
Meanwhile, Douglas Ward began his prison sentence. Then in 2015, 5 years after Niall's death, Pat received a phone call.
I was informed by one of my team, did you hear Douglas Ward died in prison? And I said, no, I didn't hear.
I got a call at work from Pat Mary. I thought me and Pat were finished. You're going to hear in the news now, he says, in about an hour. His young man, Ward, he says, was found dead in his cell this morning.
On the 8th of May 2015, that morning, early, about 6:30 in the morning, prison officers came to his cell and found him unresponsive. He had drank prison hooch the night before in his cell, and illegal alcohol that he consumed in prison.
So the only solace I got out of that man dying was, rather than him having to emigrate, I could be assured from that day forward that I'd never have to meet him again. And that was not a bad thing, but I certainly would not have wished him dead.
So be it. I wouldn't lose any sleep over it anyway.
with the discovery of 2 more bodies tonight, the job for Suffolk Police suddenly got a lot bigger. A motorist alerted police this afternoon after he saw a naked woman's body near the road.
In December 2006, police in Ipswich discovered 5 women dead in the Suffolk countryside. The last person to see them alive was ex-cruise ship steward Steve Wright.
I'm told that Steve was responsible for these bodies found locally here, and I still can't believe that he was able to do it or even do it.
This is a huge case. When you get 5 murders in 6 weeks, unprecedented.
There's a sense of disbelief almost that this could be happening in my hometown. No one had seen anything like this before.
His killing spree was frenetic, at times almost unbelievable. This was the moment that Wright's 4th and 5th victims were discovered.
He basically asphyxiated them, either smothered them, strangled them, squeezed the life out of them.
Steve Wright became known as the Suffolk Strangler, a name his father Conrad could never relate to.
He was always a woman lover, not a woman killer. You know, he had 4 or 5 different partners. I mean, I can understand somebody accidentally, perhaps killing one, but not, you know, one every other day.
When somebody's murdered, we think about the family that was affected, you know, these innocent parties who suddenly have their lives ripped apart because a loved one has been taken from them in such a diabolical way and state. But what we often fail to see is that the person who's carried out those crimes are still loved. The impact of knowing that a member of your family is a serial killer is something that essentially breaks the foundations of everything you know, and also means that they are victims as well.
Stephen Wright, he went out, he had 6 weeks, and he just went on a killing spree. One by one, these lovely young women were killed. He targeted them and he took full advantage.
Steve Wright was one of those human beings that blended in perfectly to society. He didn't stand out in any particular way. And that's that kind of reflection that we never really know who we're living amongst. And it's a stark warning to most of us that those people that we think are just ordinary human beings can actually be killers in disguise.
He's very quiet, and say boat or ghost, really. He was sitting in my house and showed no indication of me sitting next to someone who'd murdered people.
As a child, Steve Wright travelled the world with his brother, 2 sisters, and his mother, following his father's work in the RAF.
He was a bit of a tomboy, really, a tinker, you might say, you know, always full of life. When I'm done my shift, you was down the beach, because you were always in the hot country anyway, and you spent your time at the beach and the swimming pool, especially in Singapore. And I can see Steve now, he's diving in and out of the water all the time, so much so his nose was becoming skinless, like. He just couldn't keep out of the water. There was never any trouble.
When you're a child, having continuity and kind of a sense of a solid foundation is really important. It's how you form your identity. It's how you form your sense of security. When you have quite a lot of displacement because your parents are moving around because of their jobs, unless you have a really solid relationship with those people, life can feel really uncertain and really insecure, and that can have really far-reaching consequences on your personality and how you develop.
You know, kids, and when there's 4 of them, you got 4 lots of mischief, if you like, although it's never big stuff. They're always together. Playful, I think is probably the better word. But there's never any trouble. I had never had to sort of apologise to anybody for them for anything, you know, and that was it.
We know he had perhaps a little bit of an unhappy childhood. His dad was in the RAF and travelled around the world, so there was a fair amount of travelling when he was little. Perhaps never really settled in any one place.
Every weekend, the British families always used to get together and they had big parties, and all you had to do, you took your bottle along to the house party, and the house you went to done the food. And because we was on the ring, like we had our go at it. The parties, there was possibly too many, you know.
In 1964, the family returned to the UK, but Conrad's relationship with his wife was in trouble.
We got the train from Paddington, I think. I can't remember how we got to Paddington, quite honestly. And they got the train, we were going to get off the train at Ipswich, but we were still having an argument, you know. I'm not coming with you, I want to go and see my mum, I'll take the 2 girls, you take the 2 boys. And I never thought that she would stay on that train. We got off the train in Ipswich, the boys got off, and they was looking, you know, where's mum, you know, and where's the 2 girls? And of course, they went. Kept on the train and went, and I never see her since. Well, he sat and watched his mother go, didn't he? Or stood and watched his mother go. He never got her back. And he was only 8 at the time.
When you think about the stereotypical experience of a child, the idea is that they are with their mother, who nurtures and loves them. If she rejects you, the feelings that you are left with is, what was wrong with me? What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? The way that that manifests and grows can distort all the relationships that you have for the rest of your life. It's a primary rejection, it's a primary abandonment, and that's incredibly painful to deal with.
I arrived home with the 2 boys, no wife, no girls, and my mother, I said, where are they? Well, I think they become sort of vacant in a way. They couldn't work it all out, you know, what is going on, you know. After a few weeks, I couldn't handle it. I went and got the girls, and there was no hassle. She didn't want to keep the girls, and I ended up with the 4 of them. With the help of my mother and father, I was able to look after them, and I was still in the RAF.
Conrad soon met another woman, the kids' babysitter, who became his second wife. And as he worked, she became their main parent.
Because Val come along, and very difficult to discipline, if I say discipline, that's a strong word, that, but to keep control, if you like, of 4 children that are not yours. They just trying to crowd her out. You're not a real mum, had too much of that.
These children were in grief. Their lives were being broken down, and they needed a systematic foundation where they felt loved and cared for and compassionately received. And actually, instead, they probably felt like they were a burden, a second thought.
As Steve reached his teenage years, he very quickly began to forge his own life.
Well, I don't suppose I see much of him, did I? As a teenager. Really, he worked at a hotel in Aldeburgh. He got a job on the Townsend, Torrens and Ferries, and he must have been a teenager there because he married a young girl from Wales.
Considered a charming man, Steve Wright never had any problems attracting a partner, but the stability he craved eluded him.
He's had 2 wives, and I said, he's had 4 or 5 different lady friends. Well, both the girls he was married to, they stayed here for a few weeks at a time, and there was no argument, you know. There's no sort of raised voices or anything like that. Everybody was happy.
The fact that Wright marries tells us something very symbolic and significant. He's on a search for something. Something is elementally missing in the relationships that he experiences, so he transitions from one to another, hoping it will fix him.
He'd come out at the weekends, and he got a job at the bingo hall up in town. But I do believe he when he passes the bookies, he used to take his money in there, and you don't win at that game. In fact, at one time I said, well, when you get your wages, Steve, you bring it to me. And I used to put it in a cupboard upstairs. I said, you can have enough money to... I mean, I'm talking to someone who's 30 years plus now. You can have your spend the money, but you're not going to take it all to the bookies.
Wright had a relatively dysfunctional upbringing and obviously had a relationship with his father that was transient at times. They were still connected and close. We know that Wright would go to see Conrad when he was struggling. He would confide in him his troubles, but obviously it never extended to confiding in him about the killings.
He'd said he'd got a job on the QE2, but that was only for a fortnight. I'm not going. I'm not going to bother with that. I told him to go because, you know, I said, you create a good impression, you get a job.
He's working as a steward, serving first-class customers, and went to some fantastic places. He admitted it in court. He was explaining his use of prostitutes, and he said that started when he was on the QE2 and visiting places like Thailand.
I used to pull in there for 2 or 3 days at a time because they all went ashore. There was a programme on the television at one time, and you could see him sitting at a bar with others, with the local females sort of all over him, you know.
We know that whenever he docked, he would head straight for the brothels. That tells us quite a few things. It shows that he has low boundaries. He's quite happy to push those social norms. The first thing he's thinking of is sex, and also sex in as many different ways as he can get it with as many different people as he can have it with. But secondly, it shows low social responsibility. If you can just get off a ship and go and have sex with different people, you're not really thinking about them as human beings, you're thinking about your need first. And the problem is when you have a mindset that a sexual creature is just an object, well, you can do what you want with them, even dispose of them.
For weeks now, police have been anxious to trace the 2 prostitutes who were friends and were last seen working in Ipswich's red light district, as they wait to see whether they have a double murder on their hands.
In October 2006, the body of missing sex worker Gemma Adams was found in a stream 7 miles from the Ipswich home of killer Steve Wright.
So at the time when these girls were being murdered, he was living with a partner and her son in this one house.
He'd been here only a matter of a few months, actually. We were kind of in the heart of what was the red light area, and he used to drive around in his Mondeo and pick women up and took them back here.
The first girl that went missing was Tanya Nicol. Now, her mum reported her immediately. Then Gemma went missing, Gemma Adams went missing. You now have 2 women missing who are both sex workers, you know, on drugs, and they're vulnerable young women.
Steve had been using prostitutes since his visits to Thailand on the QE2. Now it seemed he had a habit closer to home.
The only thing I can come up with, if he was using street workers, if you like, you know, young girls, and then he found himself physically, he couldn't sort of do what he wanted to do because of medical reasons maybe, or, you know, and that threw his mind. And then maybe he kept trying with another girl and still couldn't, and he lost it. Did he ever lose his temper, or, well, I mean, these were all in 6 weeks. Couldn't believe it. I still feel that something is not really finished.
There's plenty of evidence that they went into the house and that he later dumped the bodies, but it's only supposition, of course, that he did carry out the murders here, and the police have always said that they just don't know where he did do the murders.
The investigating team were investigating 2 missing persons, although they felt they probably were linked, but they kept them separate so they could cross-search. However, it didn't take too long before the investigating officers realised these cases were linked. And then what subsequently happened, obviously, Gemma was found in the stream, Tanya was found downstream.
There was public appeals. They were carrying out inquiries, house-to-house inquiries, carrying out road checks of cars in the area. It's now become a double murder.
Subsequently, the other 3 women, their bodies were found, and that was a linked series of murders.
A body of a third woman is found in woods at a place called Nacton, again on the outskirts of Ipswich. It turned out to be Annalie Alderton, who'd also been working on the streets, hadn't been reported missing. It was on the same day that Paula Clennell was announced missing. By the early evening, there'd been a report come into the police that another woman called Annette Nichols was also missing. Paula Clennell was found in woods at the side of the road. A police helicopter went up, and very quickly they identified another body on the ground, and that sadly was the body of Annette Nichols.
The 2 in Nacton Road were laid out in a crucifix position, as they informed everybody else. And again, if you happen to kill somebody willingly or accidentally, you don't, and they think, well, you begin to panic and so I've got to get rid of this body. You then don't take it to a wood to get rid of it and then start laying it out in a certain position. That's something that I can't do. You'd have thought he would just dump the body and run, but no, he didn't.
Stephen Wright chose to position 2 of the women's bodies in the crucifix position. One, probably to try to throw the police off course because the other bodies hadn't been dealt with that way. Secondly, potentially for dramatic effect, because unusually a lot of killers like to leave their work with a certain mark. And most importantly, because there was some thrill at the end of doing that, of creating that, of making that body look a certain way. So he was enjoying his work.
At night, while his partner was working, Steve Wright was cruising the red light district, looking for sex, and this is where he found his victims.
These 5 women, all very vulnerable. You know, they were working to earn money on the streets because they're in the grip of the Class A drug addiction. There's just a feeling that, you know, this guy's got to be caught, who is clearly the same person who's doing it.
Stephen Wright is out there, and under the nose of the investigating team, he's committing more murders. So was he getting a kick? Was he getting off on the fact that I'm murdering while the police are looking for me? We'll never know, but I've never known a case where you have that many murders in such a short space of time. He knew the police were out there. He'd been stopped by the police. Was he enjoying that moment, his moment, when suddenly I'm becoming, you know, quite famous in the media?
Undoubtedly, Stephen Wright sees women as things that he can use for his own pleasure, his own purpose. The fact that he's using prostitutes pretty much on his doorstep means that he has absolutely no respect for his relationship, but also sees women as something that he can use to his own benefit and purpose. He is pushing his boundaries consistently. And the problem with boundaries is if we have a predisposition for doing great harm, there is a point that that boundary snaps. And that's what happens. Steve Boundary gets to a point where the boundary snaps.
I heard it on the television, I suppose. When this happened, I never thought anything about Steve. Well, I was just reading about it and just, you know, that much interested in a way, I suppose.
The sad thing about these cases, these 5 women, although they are sex workers, you know, there's someone's daughter, there's someone's sister, there's someone's child, and they were vulnerable, they're at risk. These young women were on those streets, they were addicts, they needed support and they needed help. And sadly, they were vulnerable to the likes of Stephen Wright. He knew they were vulnerable and he took advantage. And we'll never know, unless he tells us, what actually he did and how he lured them and what he did and how he got them on his own.
Well, anybody that does something like this, and 5 bodies in 6 weeks, have got to snap in their head. You know, no control whatsoever. It's not. You can't be a normal person. Something went wrong. I can't see why he'd done it. What had he got against him?
Detectives have spent the day trying to cast more light into the shadowy world of Ipswich's red light district to try to answer the question, who murdered 5 prostitutes?
In the lush countryside outside Ipswich, Steve Wright was taking advantage of his local knowledge and had disposed of the bodies of women he'd murdered in areas he thought they'd never be found.
I'm told that Steve was responsible for these bodies found locally here, and I still can't believe that he was able to do it or even do it. But it seems as though he was found guilty, and that's the end of it.
The murders weren't Steve's first experiences of sexual violence.
A former wife of his gave an interview talking about him being thoroughly abusive right from the point where their relationship started. So there is that side of him, without a doubt.
Wright was not a nice man to be in a relationship with. He was a domestic abuser, he was violent, he was controlling, and this tells us something really important, because if you are able to harm the people in your life that you are meant to protect, what does that suggest about you with a stranger?
We know 3 of Stephen Wright's victims were asphyxiated, so he had his hand around their throat, or was he trying to smother them or block their windpipe? Did the girls die during, the act of sexual intercourse with Stephen Wright, or did they die, because he was strangling them at the same time, or were they strangled after? We'll never absolutely know what happened, because unless Stephen Wright ever tells us, but the facts are quite simple. We know that he strangled 3 girls.
He was called the Suffolk Strangler. I suppose it's a headline writer's coined that sort of name, and I think it stuck.
This violent side of Steve was not something that his father saw.
He's had 2 wives, and he's had 4 or 5 different lady friends, if you like, and not one of them said anything detrimental about him, No one complained. If he was violent or argumentative or whatever, surely one of them would say to me, can you have a word with Steve or whatever? No. It's not just one person, there's 5 or 6 of them.
The fact that Conrad struggles with believing that his son was capable of murder isn't unusual. It's a sense of cognitive dissonance. You can't have 2 conflicting beliefs at the same time. You can't say to yourself, my son is a hateful, psychopathic, torturous murderer, and I love my son, he's a great guy. It just doesn't work.
He was all right at the weekends and coming out with me. Cricket, we used to do cricket, and we had a cricket tea and have a drink after the match. I'm led to believe those 2 he's led a double life, but I can't believe it because I was with him so many times.
After his marriages ended, Steve drifted in and out of relationships and work, often ending up back at his dad's home whenever he was in trouble.
Well, this is where Steve used to bed down when he was here. And he'd sometimes come to bed very early, and this is where he kept. Done what he wanted to do, and no one sort of was checking on him to see what he was at. In fact, he thought he was, he'd got a home here whenever he wanted it.
I think it's interesting that Stephen Wright went on from being a quiet introvert, apparently quiet individual who didn't bother with many people. However, there was 2 sides to this guy. I'm sure his dad didn't know that he was, frequently using sex workers. And I'm sure when his wife was at work all night, She didn't know while she's at work he's having sex with young women. Although he's a loner and he was quiet, he clearly was someone who had a very, very dual personality, very strange.
I know he did try to commit suicide once. I got a call 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when I was on nights to say that my son had been found in the car, his girlfriend's car, with a hose, and he was taken to Peterborough Hospital, where I went. And I can remember saying something like, "What did you do that for, boy?" And I don't know whether I got an answer from him, I can't remember.
Stephen Wright has a level of self-loathing. There is absolutely some kind of conscience there. He's a man who has felt so unhappy that he's wanted to kill himself. When things go wrong for Stephen Wright, there is some kind of extreme reaction, whether that's trying to commit suicide, whether that's going out and gambling lots of money, whether it's having sex with prostitutes. We know that he can't cope in a cogent way. He finds usually a negative behaviour pattern to deal with his self-pain and self-hate.
Another dramatic event occurred when Steve's mother reappeared in Ipswich, the first time he'd seen her since he was 8.
With his sister getting married 30 years later, his mother then come from America. They arranged it somehow, and she wanted to visit the children, and she went to see Steve at a pub in Plumstead, I believe it was, and he didn't like it. He says, "Why now, after 30 years?" And I think if his head or mind did change, I think the shock of that was probably what set him off.
The fact that Conrad thinks that Patricia walking into the pub that Stephen Wright worked at and connecting with him again could have made him so angry that he chose to go out on murder just does not make sense. Stephen Wright had an opportunity to reclaim his relationship with what was his initial primary caregiver, and he chose not to. So there was something in his psyche saying that he had made a choice that she was not required in his life. And that could suggest that he has resentment and bitterness and hostility that he knows would play into that relationship with his mother if he sustained it. So it was better to reject.
In Ipswich, concerned the man now dubbed the Suffolk Strangler would strike again, police quickly made an arrest for the murders of the women, but it was not Steve Wright.
The police would have been looking at a number of lines of inquiries around people who went with sex workers.
They'd arrested a guy on suspicion of all 5 murders. He was a guy who frequented the red light area, befriended a lot of the women who were working there. A lot of them had been to his house.
However, the police had managed to recover DNA from 3 of the victims.
From the 1st of November, when Tanya was reported missing, to the 15th of December, when the 5 murders got linked, the police then managed to fast-track DNA, the forensic evidence.
Steve Wright's DNA was already in the police DNA database at this point.
He had been working in a hotel in Felixstowe some years previously and had, I think, stolen some money from the till. It was a matter of £80 or so. But he was caught and he was arrested, and as a result his DNA was taken. That meant it was on the police records. So when they recovered DNA from the 3 victims found on dry land, they were able to compare it to the national database, and hey presto, it was Steve Wright.
Police arrived before dawn to make a second arrest in 2 days. Stephen Wright was taken from his home. Shortly afterwards, both the house and road were sealed off.
Well, I got a knock on the door from a male and a female from one of the reporters in the national paper, and they told me your son has been arrested for the Ipswich murders. I couldn't believe it.
On the 19th of December 2006, Stephen Wright was arrested in his home and charged with the murders of 5 women.
I just can't fathom out at all how he's capable of doing that. But the thing is, there's not been any more, has there? Once he's locked up, there ain't no more.
Steve's DNA had matched that found at the crime scenes.
As soon as they got that fast-track DNA through, they knew it was him, they pieced it all together, and they charged him on the 21st of December. And I think everyone in Suffolk and across the country felt, what a relief. And for those people in Suffolk, thank goodness someone was locked up for it, because people were frightened to go out. It was leading up to Christmas, you know, festivities, parties, and everyone was worried. You don't want to be out on the street. You know, it's really, really worrying. So, great piece of police work.
Neighbours were very surprised. People didn't know him that well. He'd only been here a few months. I think one chap told me that he spent a lot of the time cleaning his car, and that was about it.
But the police were convinced Steve was their killer and visited the home that, over the years, Conrad had shared with his son.
Yeah, they turned up, they said, can we have a look in your garage? I said, well, you can, but there's nothing in it, it's empty. And when I come out, the son and the mirror were struggling to get to me first because they thought I had things to say. Well, I hadn't got nothing in it. And they were pushing and shoving, and I piled into them in the end.
On the 22nd of December, Stephen Wright attended Ipswich Magistrates Court.
Steve Wright was very quickly charged with 5 counts of murder. Crown Prosecution Service talked to the police and very quickly decided that there was enough evidence to charge him. There's a packed courtroom. I think they had to arrange 70 seats for journalists. And Steve Wright came in, and I always remember he almost had a sort of quizzical kind of look on his face. At this stage, nobody knew the extent of the evidence that there was against Steve Wright, you know. There's no end of forensic evidence. There was DNA, there was fibres of his clothing found on bodies, fibres from his house found on bodies, DNA from the girl's blood of some of the victims found on his clothing. None of that. Nobody knew any of this at that stage.
He finally faced trial on the 16th of January 2008 at Ipswich Crown Court.
Well, I went to court every day, and we got there. We were first to arrive, actually. My son took me, and then I saw the families arrive, and I said, well, I can't sit with them, you know, and because initially when it all started, they were crying and all sorts. And I sat in another room, and the press were in there as well, sat as close to the front as I could.
The trial was not awaited. It was some 14 months or so after the murders. A huge amount of interest. Naturally, all the families of the victims wanted to see justice done for their loved ones. So it's a big moment for them as well. And this was the first time that they got to see Steve Wright in the flesh and hear the evidence against him.
I did see him once when he got up. Before the actual case, he was brought into the court, and I stood up, and he came. He was in a glassed-off area, and I think that he looked, and he saw me, but that was all, you know, and he just went. And I thought, when I come out, well, at least he knows I was there.
I felt the evidence was pretty overwhelming. There was his DNA was on the bodies of the 3 women who were found on dry land, and there was forensic evidence in the form of clothing fibres from his clothes, and those same fibres were also found on the bodies of the women. I remember Tanya Nicole. Her body had been in water for some 6 weeks or so, but the police still recovered quite a large, about a 5mm long fibre caught up in her hair. There was about over 170 individual pieces of forensic evidence.
The police got him on his DNA, and when he was being questioned in court, every answer was no comment, no comment.
The jury convicted him in about 6 hours. I mean, this is 5 murders. But that just shows you the evidence was overwhelming, compelling evidence. DNA was a golden nugget, but combined with all the other forensic evidence, particularly on Tanya Nicol, that fibre in her hair, that had come from the footwell of his car, he was done.
I think the families there was sort of some gasps of relief that justice was being done, but no reaction from Steve Wright and the doc. I looked at him, he looked down, still that same pretty blank expression.
The jury come in and find him guilty, and that's the end of it. There's no follow-up, you know, not to my mind anyway.
Not long after the court case, Conrad went to visit Steve in jail.
At Belmarsh, I had to book in because I had an appointment, and I had to empty all my pockets. And so I'd got nothing when I went into the sort of waiting room to be called. And I sat in the waiting room, and there was other people there, women with kids. But I looked around, and I think felt I was the only one with a suit on, you know. And then I got called in to do my searching, like, and I had to take my jacket off and lift your arms up, and then you stand in a little square, and they bring the dogs in and sniff all around you, thinking I'm taking drugs in, I suppose, you know. But I went through that, and I was thinking at the time that I ain't coming here anymore. But then it was all for nothing anyway, because according to one of the officers, they wouldn't see me. He said, "Your son won't see you. There's nothing we can do about it."
The fact that Wright won't see his father in prison is absolutely telling. He knows that he committed those murders. And he knows that Conrad, as much as he tries to think about his innocence, understands really somewhere that that's the case. Confronting who he really is with someone who really never knew him, but that he loved, is something that emotionally he just can't deal with. It's as simple as that. It's cowardice.
Steve did make one attempt to get in touch with his dad.
I got a letter from him once to say that he believed I was the only one that believed he was innocent and stuff like that. Now, why would he say things like that to me? Well, I got rid of it, and at this moment in time, today, I wish I'd have kept it. But I had to get rid of it in the end because it was sort of upsetting me in a way. I used to keep getting out and looking, getting nowhere, and I thought, well, everything, all these photographs went. Got to clear up. He wasn't crying out for help. And he seemed to be quite happy taking the punishment that had been dished out to him. He knows where I am because I'm in the same house, and you would think, you know, decently he would write to his dad and say, well, look, Dad, I've done this and I've done that, and I'm sorry, and things like that, but not even that. Nothing. Well, I think I've really got accustomed to it.
I think that Stephen Wright is one of the most dangerous types of human being. And I think that having a relationship with him would be challenging for anyone. But I also think there is some synergy between Conrad and him that is unresolved and needs to be resolved. And maybe building a relationship of some sort would help them both.
I don't know why I'm worrying and thinking about Steve, quite honestly. We should be thinking about the girls involved and their families.
Conrad's biggest struggle is that somewhere in him he still loves his son, he still cares for him, and to some degree it's important that at some point he realises that that's okay. It's okay for us to love the part of the human being that we knew. We can reject the part of that human being that did harm, but there is nothing wrong with still loving somebody who did horrible things. And making peace with that is really important because it's not your guilt to carry, it's theirs.
I think must be a very difficult thing for any parent to think or to realise my son is a serial killer and is responsible for the deaths of 5 innocent women. The evidence is there that he did kill those women, murdered them.
I don't think we'll ever know unless Stephen Wright one day decides that he wants to talk, or maybe a member of the family will get him to talk, or maybe his dad will go and visit him. I've got to say, if it was my child, I think I'd want to go and find out and say, why did you do it? What caused you to do it?
Maybe I should write a letter and see whether the prison governor would pass it on to him. That might be a challenge for me to see whether, in fact, I got an answer. If I can find out that prison, that's what I'll do. I'll write a letter to him and see whether I get an answer. I don't think I particularly want to go to see him if he's in there permanently, because that'll upset me and that'll certainly upset him. I would still like to know the missing bits of the puzzle. As far as I'm concerned, there are missing pieces.
đi học à? Mai đi học à? Thế em? Bố à? Chào bố chưa? Giống ai? Giống bố giống mẹ? Giống ai? Giống ai? Đúng rồi. Chúng mẹ đi đâu đi? Thế bà nó ăn cơm chưa? Chưa. Ăn rồi à? Mấy bé?